ChessDiagnostic.
Hello everybody, and welcome to day 27 of 28 Days to Better Chess Tactics. In the previous parts from day 1 until now, we've looked at tactical patterns and motifs, specific positions to study, from simple to complicated. And this should have prepared you to start looking and advancing to the next level, which is studying complete tactical games. Now, the idea behind studying an entire game for tactics specifically is that, well, you're going to study the opening, the middle game, and the end game, and you're going to get a complete course on the entire game. Now, you need to learn how to integrate your tactical understanding into a real game, and studying strong players' games and old games as well of the strong players, which were very tactical, is an excellent education in learning how to apply your thinking system, not just finding tactical shots or tactical patterns, but in learning how to integrate the knowledge that you've learned into your overall understanding of chess. And this is sometimes the hardest part. The hardest transition is going from basically being an average player where you know tactics, you know what you should do, but it's hard to find what to do when things are unclear. And it does take a lot of work. You have to study a lot of games, but I've covered previously to start with miniatures. Now, miniatures are complete games, but of course they're missing a lot of the strategic content, the opening content of stronger games, where you'll play just normal moves and you have to figure out how to drum up tactics. So an opening I would recommend that you use is, for example, if you play quietly, you should be playing the martial attack of the Ruy Lopez as black, or the Sicilian najdorf defense. And if you feel uncomfortable in these positions, it's normally because you have a tactical weakness, as well as misunderstanding the opening or not understanding it at all. And it'll help you learn the line, as well as being more comfortable in very complicated and tactical lines where there's a lot of contact between the pieces and you have to look through the fog of variations to figure out what to do. So this game starts with e4, e5, and knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5. So the standard Ruy Lopez position. And you can see that there's really no tactics at this point in the game. It's just an opening line where both players are developing. Knight to f6, white castles, bishop to e7, rook to e1. After b5, the bishop goes back, black castles. Now with c3, this is the standard martial attack position. Now the idea behind the martial attack for black is that he sacrifices a pawn. Basically it's a gambit, but it's very sound because black gets a raging attack. And at first when I learned this position, when I studied it, I play it myself. But when I first learned about it, it didn't really make any sense because it seems like he just gives away a pawn in the center and he has problems. But not really, because if you look at this mass of pieces here and the formation of pawns, the knight can't develop and white's behind in development quite a bit. This bishop's not really accomplishing anything, and if he trades this knight, which he does, then black's king is just sitting naked on the king side. And it's these factors that lead black to a very strong attack. Now, practically, it's much easier to attack than to defend, and it's also a great way to use your tactical ability to win games, especially against stronger players. You'd be surprised how, if you're attacking and they're defending, they can make a lot of blunders even. So the next line is d5. This is giving away the pawn, leaving the e5 pawn undefended after e takes, knight takes, and then if white chooses to accept, which a lot of times against strong players he won't, he'll play something like d3, just preparing normal development and rejecting it. But if he does accept, you trade the knights, and then after the rook takes and c6, you've secured this knight because it was double attacked with the rook and the bishop, and you're ready to develop your bishops, your bishop pair. And because this rook is sitting awkwardly in the center, it can be attacked very easily. So normally he moves it back, but just look at this position. White has these undeveloped pieces. You have a very clear and free center for your bishops. These pawns are strong, so there's really nothing to attack yet. And you just have easy development. For example, ideas like f5 eventually. So the bishop is activated with d6, and now the queen can come in and start an attack. And normally after g3, so this cuts off the dark square bishop, but it has drawbacks because now it creates light square weaknesses where the bishop can occupy these squares. And white is on a race to develop. So far we've looked at this game, and there's not too many tactics. There was a sacrifice of a pawn, which you could have calculated variations on, but if you know the line, it's quite simple. And we have to figure out what to do from this point. Now with tactics, there's a slight difference between tactics and attack. You'll use tactics to destroy the opponent's position, but an attack is your general idea to start an attack on a specific part of the board and to try to overwhelm your opponent. So in this position, black just plays bishop to f5. So he's trying to, for example, play bishop to d3 and really screw white over. So white plays d4. So we're not really looking at tactical shots at this point. And this is a thing to notice when you're studying tactical games, is when is a tactical shot being calculated, what specific elements in a position lead that grandmaster to start calculating variations. And this will help you to notice it in your own games. It'll kind of set off your own tactical radar. Now, this is why I recommend a thought process, because you'll be able to figure it out over the board methodically. If you just rely, especially when you're weaker, on your intuition to figure it out, you'll probably miss a shot. And this even happens to strong grandmasters. When you're playing, you don't really use your thought process, but when you're training, you should, and you shouldn't miss such tactical shots. So queen comes up. Now black has connected the rooks. He's accomplished the opening task of basically developing all your minor pieces, controlling the center, castling your king, connecting your rooks, and then lastly developing your queen. Now he's ready to occupy these weak light squares. Alright, bishop comes up. Now the knight can take, creating some weaknesses, but he wants to keep as many pieces on the board. The rook comes in. Black is totally developed, and he's ready to activate his rooks, his bishops, and his knight. So white has accomplished some goals, and the computer's actually evaluating plus 0.4 for white. So technically you can consider it equal, but practically it's very hard for white to play such positions, even if he hasn't made any mistakes, which here he hasn't. He's played quite solidly and managed to solve some of his problems for white in the martial attack. But black is able to drum up an attack by simply activating his pieces. Attacking the queen. The queen puts itself on a less active position, and Aronian makes a slight mistake by attacking the queen again. Now, the correct move was simply to play bishop to c2, forcing a trade. But then after f5, which I talked about earlier, the idea is basically just to weaken the kingside position, as well as activate these two rooks, which are very powerful at this point. And technically it's equal after this line, where there's a trade, but you can see that even though white has won 2 pawns, black will win it back and have a strong attack. So practically he has good chances. This is a great opening to play against amateurs and to learn to improve your tactics, definitely. Alright, so we're going to go back. So after bishop to f5, white makes a mistake and moves his queen. Now the rook becomes active, and white's just trying to activate all of his minor pieces. So after the bishop comes in and threatens the knight, we can see that it's pretty much equal. So white has developed. He's basically managed to almost connect his rooks, but he does have some weaknesses around his king, and black is just trying to figure out a way to get maximum activity for all these pieces. The rook's threatening the knight, but the correct move was to simply bring the knight back, and then, for example, if the bishop comes to f3, white has a pretty big threat of queen to h3, threatening checkmate. But after knight to d2, the bishop's chased back to h5 or g4. So it's not too bad. But this is where Shabalov starts to go wrong. He plays f3, attacking the bishop, but this should set off your tactical radar. Now, notice where you should calculate lines in a game, especially after the opponent's made a mistake. This will help you improve your strategic understanding as well as your tactics. And this is the ultimate goal, not just to memorize patterns, but to figure out when your opponent's made a mistake and how to capitalize on it. So what would you calculate at this point? Bishop takes f3, of course, at which it'll give you the idea of bishop takes g3 after the knight takes, and then rook takes. Of course, you could bring your bishop back here or here. The knight would just take. You could bring it forward, but it doesn't make logical sense based on your strategic understanding, which should be based around piece activity. You know that attacking an opponent is the strongest way to increase your activity and decrease the opponent's activity, which is your overall strategic goal and will allow you to attack the opponent much more strongly. So after bishop takes the pawn and the knight takes, the bishop takes here, and if he accepts the sacrifice, black is actually winning at this point. All right, so I want to go back and make a point of where you should end your calculation and your visualization to be able to evaluate such a position. So if you see this position and you calculate bishop takes, that's pretty simple. Bishop takes, knight takes. But then you should be able to calculate bishop takes g3, and then the rook takes. So after the king moves, which is pretty much the only move, the queen comes in, and you should be able to evaluate that you're going to win a piece back, and that you're going to have 3 passed pawns on the king side, as well as white's weak king, and you should be able to play this sacrifice from this end position. Because, for example, if the knight moves, then we just get checkmate in 1. So there's no way for white to defend this knight, and we win it. And you should be able to see that from this initial position. If you didn't see that, then you should definitely go through your thought process and work on your visualization and calculation to improve it. All right, so we end up at this position. Now, after this, what do you think we should play? We could just take the knight, of course, but what's the strongest continuation? Rook to g2 check is the strongest continuation. Now, Aronian even missed this, and he played queen to g2. So this actually makes the game equal, but even though he made a tactical mistake, it's practically a very good decision to get into this position because black is attacking. He's going to win material back with 3 passed pawns. White is almost completely inactive with a weak king, and it's a practical decision to play such tactical positions. So the main point I want to make is that when you're playing a game, you're going to make some tactical mistakes. It's very hard not to. Some slight tactical mistakes. But you should still enter tactical positions because your chances of winning a game will be much higher if you're attacking, if you're threatening things, and if you're taking material and just having lots of threats on the board. Even if it's not totally sound, a lot of times you can win. Just want to make a point on that, as well as it will improve your tactics. So, all right, so black just took the knight. I want to show you the line for rook to g2 here, though. So with rook to g2, the bishop's forced to interpose, but after rook to e8, the knight gets in the way, and with queen to f5 hitting the f2 bishop, this is the strongest line for both white and black. After the knight comes in, the rook can take because otherwise we're threatening queen to d3 and then winning this rook. For example, if the pawn takes, we get this line, queen to d2, and it's just totally losing for white. All right, so after the rook takes, queen is forced to play to d2. We get queen to g4 check, another forcing move, another forcing attacking move. All right, the bishop pins, but after we take and we take back, we're up 3 pawns, or 2 in this case, and with a totally winning position. But even Aronian, a very strong grandmaster, plays queen to g2. All right, so the king's trying to get out of the way. The bishop takes the knight. And at this point, it's actually equal. Quite amazing. So black has sacrificed a piece, but of course he got 2 pawns with these 3 connected pass pawns, very strong. And white is in a very difficult position. His king's weak, his rooks are not really active, and his queen's not active. So it's these factors that lead Shabalov to make more mistakes and lead to his losing. So black just chases the king to an inactive position. Now these are some of the hardest positions to play because there's not really too many clear winning lines, but if you understand that you just want to keep attacking, keep making threats, and keep as many pieces when you're in a tactical position, you'll make the correct moves. So what do you think the correct move here is? Should we trade the rooks? Of course not. But our rook's threatened, so we need to figure out what to do. Well, in this position, you'd want to play rook to b8, threatening a pawn push, multiple pawn pushes, keeping the attack on this weakened white king going. So sometimes you're not necessarily calculating a deep line, you're just using your understanding to make the correct decision. That's a huge part of tactics. a3, trying to give some space for the king. And now white makes a mistake. He decreases the activity of this rook, which allows black to swing his rook back. And now he's going to get both rooks on the 7th rank, and it's an easy win from this point. Queen check, rooks are completely active. All right, so white has managed to chase the queen back, but the queen reactivates itself after queen to f5, but black decides to go with the simplest solution of simply pushing his pass pawns. A very strong idea when we get to tactics in the endgame. Sometimes all you need to do is push a pass pawn, and even though white can keep making threats and open the position, eventually he's going to have to deal with that pawn getting to the 7th rank. So white makes the correct decision to try to open the position, but it doesn't really make a difference. Now he wants to trade queens, queen to f5. All right, so the black king appears slightly weak with the queen and the rook coming in, but actually once he gets king to g6, there's really nothing white can do to the king. So Aronian just keeps pushing his pawn, and now it looks like white is threatening a check, but even if the queen checks, for example, queen to h5, the king will just move to g6. So Aronian pushes his pawn again. Now notice if we go back, all he did was just keep pushing his pawn. He increased, but first, he increased his activity maximally. He got his rooks as active on the 7th rank, his queen's ready to swing over to f5, and only then does he start using his pass pawn advantage. All right, so we end up with this position. White's going to bring the rook in and have some checks, but it doesn't really accomplish anything. So Aronian pushes the pawn to the 7th rank, and after this rook move, he's completely winning because the rook can't take, but he's also threatening rook check and then just queening the pawn. So white chases the king to g6, but after rook to a6, his spite checks are pretty much over. The queen can't check anymore here because the rook would just take. Rook's covering e8. So he comes back threatening g7, but after rook takes and the queen simply just queening, white will be forced to take, and then we could just play queen and take the queen, but there's actually a stronger continuation. So this is the end of the game. Shabalov resigned here, but he could have just also played queen check and then queen the queen. Now if the queen takes, There's really nothing after this. The king escapes. There's nothing to do. Even the rook can just come back. And there's no more checks. So definitely an amazing game by Aronian. And Shabalov played quite well. It's very hard to play as white in the Marshall, and that's why a lot of grandmasters don't allow it. But I would recommend that you memorize some main lines in very tactical openings. Just the main line. Don't waste your time too much trying to memorize too much. But memorize some main lines in a tactical opening. Play it. Analyze those games, and analyze some complete tactical games by grandmasters. Definitely a very good way to improve. And if you have any questions on this method, just leave it in the comments. Alright, thanks for watching and following day 27 of 28 Days to Better Chess Tactics. I'll see you in the future. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for future videos. See you in the future.